Hello, you are listening to Germantown Community Radio, WRGU 92.9 FM. Welcome to the Jumpstart Philly Real Estate Radio Show, a weekly radio program that spotlights positive real estate development and neighborhood revitalization throughout Philadelphia. I'm your host, Derek Hengamil. Jumpstart Philly is a unique community development program that trains, mentors, networks, and provides funding to aspiring real estate developers in 7 different Philadelphia neighborhoods, including Germantown, where the program was founded. Jumpstart believes that you can do well by doing good and focuses on removing neighborhood blight, scattered site rehab, creating a healthy mix of affordable and market rate housing, and avoiding gentrification through slow, steady growth and keeping wealth local. Interviews are conducted during Jumpstart Germantown's weekly Jumpinar series on Monday nights at 7 p.m., held via Zoom webinar. For more information about these events, check out the events page at jumpstartgermantown.com. This week, I am speaking with Dan Greenspun, the president of Penn Construction and Design, about the construction timeline and how planning and budgeting factor into the process. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and be sure to check out the podcast version of this program at jumpstartgermantown.com/media or on any podcasting platforms. And Dan Greenspun is the owner of Penn Construction and Design. He grew up in Havertown. After graduating from college, he moved back in with his parents, who were adding an addition to their home. He asked the contractor if he could help with additions and was hired. During this project, Dan saw how the construction process came together and fell in love with the experience of transforming his parents' house into their dream home. For over 10 years, Dan has worked in the construction and design field, specializing in bathroom and kitchen renovations. His love for construction led him to venture into real estate, leading Dan to open up his sister company, DMG Elite Properties. He invested in his first real estate property over 10 years ago and has acquired multiple properties throughout the Delaware County area since. When he isn't transforming people's homes or investing in new ones, he is known to run a race or two. He's an Ironman and avid triathlete. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dan. Dan, how you doing tonight?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. So I appreciate you giving us your time, and we have a limited amount of time and a lot to cover. So let's jump right into it. And obviously the broad topic is the construction timeline and kind of going over what people can expect for their first, second, or third construction on their real estate investment. So, we spoke briefly before this, and you highlighted planning as a huge part of the process. So I think it's a good way to kick off. And maybe you could just tell me what planning goes into a construction project and what sorts of things fall under that.
Sure. Yeah. Penn Construction Design, we believe that planning is everything. We sort of believe you do a lot more work up front that makes the renovation go faster, smoother, and a much better experience. Right. Typically what will happen is we'll get a call. I'll come out to the property. I'll get a sense of what the person or company is looking to do to renovate the property. I'll give some suggestions, but I'm just trying to get the idea of what they want to do out of their head so I can form a scope of work. I'll typically raise some concerns about what we may or may not find as we walk through the property, and usually I'll make some suggestions of what will add value and what maybe won't, or at least as much as they think.
Right. So planning, is that process solely on the contractor? Is that the investor too, or what's the relationship as far as the sharing of ideas and kind of like you said, getting something out of someone's head? What portion of the process lies on the contractor versus the investor?
Yeah, it's really a team effort. We need to be really honest with each other. I need to have an idea of budget and what they're trying to accomplish in this project. And then with that, we're going to give them ideas, materials, types of things they want to use to accomplish that job. But it is a team effort, and we have to work together.
Great. Cool. And we're going to talk a little bit in a little bit, we'll talk about the ways to hire a contractor and what are some good, key indicators of what makes a good contractor and how to form that relationship. But before we get to that, I want to go back to the planning process. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about the timeline of planning. How far ahead of construction starting and you really getting in the building and doing the dirty work does the planning process need to happen? from settlement, how much time should you give yourself to plan before you actually go to the building?
So I believe that hopefully it starts before settlement. Hopefully you bring us in there at your home inspection, or in some period before you close. Hopefully at least 30 days before you close. That will allow us to come in. Hopefully we can do 3D renderings of kitchens, bathrooms, any other types of spaces we need to do. That'll give us square footages, give you an idea of what the space is going to look like. Remodeling's tough. You're putting a lot of faith in your contractor. We say it's really easy to buy a car. You get to sit in it, you get to feel it, smell it, know what color it's going to be. Right. In remodeling, all of that falls on the contractor. So we try and bring it to life through like a 3D design program, kind of like you see on HGTV. And that will really start off the planning process. Are we over budget? Are we under budget? What do we have to do to make this project run smoothly? Typically, we find that the planning process is going to take between 30 and 45 days. Could be longer. Some of that's going to be on the investor or homeowner, because they have a lot of selections of materials that they need to make.
Cool. So I want to go back. You said 3D renderings is a really good tool that you use. Is that something that you find is commonly used amongst contractors, or is that something that's special to your service?
There's definitely other contractors that are using it. Typically, the design build firms that you see, they're all using it. When you use kind of a guy in a truck, we call it, which has its pluses and minuses. But they haven't invested the thousands of dollars in software and the time to learn it. But I can tell you that it's extremely helpful.
Cool. And so in that period before settlement, you said around 30 days, hopefully that's when you start to plan. How far do you need to go with your plans? Do you need to have like a perfect image of what the finished product is going to look like, or is there certain parts that you should focus on first? Obviously you've been through the property if you're having a contractor look at the plans, but there's still a lot to learn, after settlement when you're actually looking through the property, like more in detail. So how far do you need to go as far as your design plans?
Yeah, our design plans we try and get everything picked out, planned, and ordered before we demo. That way, especially in a COVID world, we're not having these delays on materials and things. So we really require that everything's done. And part of that planning process is, obviously we haven't demoed anything yet. Mm-hmm. So we want to raise those concerns to the investor or the homeowner. Here's what's there. Here's what I think we're going to find once we demo it. Here's what we might find, and sort of have courses of action for all of those things. So we're, after we demo it, we're not surprised. And then we're sitting there for 2 weeks trying to figure out what to do, because, if somebody's flipping a house, those 2 weeks, every hour, every day, there's money going out the window, and you want to do that as fast as possible.
Right. So, so you mentioned that another important part of planning not only is like your timeline and your material selections and the design, but also your budget. Can you tell me a little bit about what people should be thinking in terms of planning their budget, both prior to settlement and after settlement?
Yeah, I think budget's huge. Listen, I've almost never walked into a first meeting and somebody says, I want to do this project for $100,000, and I say, okay, great, that's perfect. Typically, there's going to have to be some sacrifices. There's going to have to be some decisions made to fit in that budget. So that open and honest communication is really the biggest thing. When it comes to budget, what's going to get you your biggest and best return? It's almost always going to be kitchens and bathrooms. I think a lot of investors skip on the outside, that curb appeal, because it usually gets done last. That's when money gets tight. But the kind of the devil is in the details. You can see all over the city that some of these flips, the numbers get really tight because they weren't planned out properly, and the trim and the detail work at the end suffers, and it costs them in their resale price. You can see it all over the city.
In your experience, is it common to be planning out your budget and then get to a point where you're like, oh, this isn't really going to work at all? I mean, obviously that's why there's pro formas and the due diligence process of getting a loan on something like that. But is that common to look at the numbers and just be like, no, this isn't going to work?
Yeah, happens all the time. I looked at a property today in South Philly. I can almost guarantee you that it will not work. And that's not always a bad thing, right? As an investor, you want to know that up front. If you're dealing with a contractor that says, I can do this for 60, but they're not planning out, everything properly, and that swells to 100, well, there goes your profit. So now you just wasted 3 to 6 months and you didn't make any money. That's the worst thing that could happen.
Right. So I guess part of the planning process is like dipping your toes in the water to see how much work it's really going to be, right? The more planning you do, the less problems you're going to run into.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. And before we move on from planning, because I want to walk through everything from planning to walking away from the property and being done with it. But before we move away from what you said is the most important step, how is COVID affecting planning? Like what sorts of things are people going to have to count or factor into the equation like now as opposed to what they would have a couple of years ago or a year ago?
Price is probably, there's going to be two. It's going to be price and delays or availability.
Materials?
Of materials, yeah. So price, if you just use a standard 2x4, pre-COVID, you're talking $350, $340 per 2x4. The other day when I was there, they were at Lowe's, they were $610 a piece. So, and they were higher than that. So you can see that that's a massive, if you're ordering $15,000 in lumber, and you have nearly 100% increase, that's obviously going to affect your budget. What is that going to be going forward? I don't really know, but you should have some contingency for that. Right. Availability of materials. So depending on types and things of windows, but a lot of those things were 2 to 4 weeks. Now they're pushing 6, 8, 10 weeks. How's that going to affect your renovation? Can you pivot and get it done faster? Availability of subcontractors is also another one. Most, good contractors are very busy today. How are you going to keep them? How are you going to organize your project so it's running smoothly, on time? Payments are going out, because if the plumber is the first trade to get in there. If he's 2 weeks behind, he just pushed your whole project two weweeks behind. Right. So those are some of the things that I would look out for in today's market.
Cool. And I don't expect you to have all the details of the supply chain and everything, but for somebody who doesn't, know too much about construction and materials sourcing, why is the price going up for that sort of thing? Is it due to like worker delays or like a shortage in the material?
It's more of a shortage of labor, like inside confined factories. So they can't put as many people in the mill, so they're not producing as much. The other thing is some of these companies they're just trying to cut costs. So where they may have been shipping, hardwood flooring is a huge one right now, where they used to send a truck almost every day up from the south and bring it up. Now they're shipping maybe once a week, maybe every other week, and it's just causing delays and demand.
Sure. Okay, great. So let's move on to the bulk of the construction process, timeline wise, which would be, actually being there and doing the construction. So can you just walk me through, what the Penn process is and sort of what you typically see as the timeline of a construction project? I know obviously the first and everybody in this call should be very aware that documents and permitting is a huge roadblock to get past and kind of a milestone in the process. So maybe you can start there and then kind of walk us through it.
Yeah. So again, if we start from the very beginning, we have that planning period, design phase. Typically that's going to last 4 to 6 weeks. Hopefully in that time period, you're ready to close. As soon as you close, we can pull permits. You can't generally pull them beforehand. So you would close, pull permits, And then from there, you're ready to start your project. Obviously, the first thing is demo. Depending on the scale, that's going to last a couple of days. It could last a week or two. It just depends on the size of the project. Typically, you're going to need a meeting scheduled with the contractor at the end of demo or close to the end of demo. What did they find? Did we find rot? Did we find knob and tube? Did we find asbestos or mold or any of those types of things that need to be dealt with?
Are those the most common problems, asbestos and mold?
I would say in our area, knob and tube wiring is probably the most, the one that comes up the most. You find a lot of people will say my house has been rewired, and typically they've rewired up to the first outlet or first switch, but they didn't go beyond that. So it will sort of appear to be rewired, but once you actually open up, you're going to find that it's not. A lot of times that's going to require almost a whole home rewire, which is very expensive. So that's something, you should keep in mind as contingency.
If you're just tuning in, this is a conversation with Dan Greenspun, the president of Penn Construction and Design, about the construction timeline and how planning and budgeting factor into the process. Thanks for listening to the Jumpstart Philly Real Estate Radio Show on Germantown Community Radio, WRGU 92.9 FM. Hope you're enjoying the discussion. Cool. Great. And we were I think, talking about demo. So if you want to continue on.
Yeah. So typically demo will finish. You'll get past any hurdles, make decisions, move on from there. Your framing would go next. Framing out your spaces, then your mechanicals come in. So plumbing is always going to go first, and then your HVAC guys are going to come in, followed by electrical.
Right, and I know we had a previous speaker on talk about how it's kind of like an art of timing when different contractors are coming in and out of the building to make sure people aren't bumping elbows. Is that your recommendation? Like, obviously, you're avoiding that by doing what's in the walls before doing what's outside of the walls. But is that the order that you typically recommend? Is doing plumbing first, HVAC, and then wiring?
Yeah, that's the order. That's the order that it should go in. Are
there any exceptions to that situation? If you run into a big problem, like I'm thinking, what if you do? You start on your plumbing and then you realize there's a problem in plumbing that's going to take another week and a half to fix. Does the whole project get held up, or can you start some other things? Do you have any tips for people that can kind of navigate a situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you work with the same crew over and over again, you might be able to stick, say the plumber and the HVAC guy in there at the same time. But typically the trades don't depending on the size of the job, obviously, but if it's a 1,500 square foot house, there's not a lot of room. The trades guys don't really like to work together like that. They're kind of on top of each other. It just makes more of a mess than it's worth. Again, sort of planning it out from the beginning. I keep going back to that, but it's the truth. So if you kind of give a plumber a week or 2 weeks, depending on the size of the job, to rough it in, and you have the HVAC guy right behind them there, that's usually going to allow enough time so they're not on top of each other.
Great. And I can imagine it's another important aspect is attention to detail during demo. Like while you're going through the property, you make sure you're really looking deep at everything, right? Because you don't want to miss something in the middle while one of your other contractors is here. They say, "Oh, well, this is wrong," and then kind of all your plans are bunk. Cool. So next, you were just moving on to mechanicals and framing. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about framing and what that entails.
Yeah, framing is just, a lot of times in today's world, we're opening up these spaces, typically in the city, right? The houses are 12, 14, or 16 feet wide. In most parts of the city, you can take down almost all of the interior walls and create that open living space that everybody's after today. On the second and third floors in the city, a lot of times you're knocking out 2 of the smaller bedrooms and creating maybe a larger one. So you have to reframe closets, bathrooms, just making the space up to date for today's user. Some of these houses were built, 100 years ago, and they just don't fit the way we live today.
Right. So if you can give me a time estimation, after demo and before, or after demo until you're completed framing and mechanicals, how long do you think that would take?
So typically if we're operating a house like that, we schedule out about a week for demo, a week for framing, a week for the plumber. We'll give the HVAC guy a week. He usually doesn't need it. And then the electrician we'll also give a week to 10 days. That gives us a little bit of a buffer in case weather, or we need some extra time.
Cool. And I want to actually take a step back real quick, and maybe we could look at the process in a whole, because you're starting to mention like a week for this, a week for that. That sounds pretty quick moving. A lender like ours, like Jumpstart Germantown, we give a 12-month time to complete construction and pay back your loan after those 12 months. But I'm sure you would be sure to point out that is way too long for a construction project to take. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on the size of the job. But if you're talking a typical city house, 1,600 square feet, 2,500 square feet, typically that should be able to be done in 4 to 6 months. Again, depending on the scope of work. I think if it's planned out properly, you can get through everything up into the rough inspection, in 6 to 8 weeks. The timeline will dramatically slow down after that. So be cautious.
Right.
But yeah, the beginning part, if it's planned out properly, can move really quickly.
Great. And that makes a good segue into our next topic here. And this is where you mentioned delays might start to become more common is inspections. So after mechanicals are in, framing's done, you're all set to go. What's next?
Yeah. So you're going to call for inspection. You're going to need electrical inspection. He's going to go first. That's third party in almost every city, township around here. He's going to come in, check for rough inspection. He's going to leave a sticker, usually on the front window, saying that was complete. You're then going to call for your city inspection. That person's going to come out. They're going to check basically everything else. From there, in pre-COVID, they're usually going to ask you to insulate, and then they'll come back out and check insulation and fire stop. In today's world, a lot of times they're skipping over that and saying you can go right the drywall with some pictures and things.
So during those first two rough inspections, what are some common things that cause a stop in the system? There's just some like stupid things that people might miss that cause huge delays or anything?
Typically we haven't had any. I mean, they may ask for some minor stuff that they can either send them a picture or they can see on the final inspection. The biggest one we've ever had, which was for a client, the inspector sort of saw it as a 4-unit building instead of a 3-unit building. And the architect had to redraw some things. That was a pretty big holdup. But those things, do happen in the city. Hopefully, again, you're all planned out right. All your subcontractors, yourself, is doing everything on the up and up. And usually the inspectors are pretty good. They just ask that you're upfront with them. If you're trying to hide things, get away with things, they will make your life tough. And, you kind of deserve it.
Cool. And this is our quick plug real quick. Next week, we have a speaker from L&I coming on who is going to talk all about inspections and what the permit process looks like. So be sure to register for that. I'll have the information up at the end here. But if you want to avoid those problems Dan was just talking about, be sure to attend next week. Okay, so we got through the inspections. I don't think I had any questions for you, so we'll move on to installation and what comes after the inspections. Like once you get the electrical sticker on the front, the city inspector comes through. What's next?
Yep, insulation and fire stop is next. So fire stop is any penetration going between floors. So basement to first floor to second floor, and so on. Like where you drill through for wires and plumbing and things like that. They want fire stop, which is orange foam. Generally, there's other ways to do it, but you need to block all that so that the fire wouldn't be able to spread, as fast. And then you insulate walls, every exterior wall, obviously the ceiling, And then you would get another inspection or take pictures and send them to the inspector.
And how long does it typically take to install all the insulation and fire stopping?
You should probably be able to do that in a day or two.
Awesome. Cool. And then obviously lastly is making it pretty, right?
That's right. So drywall will come next. I think one of the biggest hangups, at least when I was first getting started, is getting drywall into the property. Pay the extra, I don't know what it is now, but $150, $200 to have it boomed in, meaning they pull it off with a boom. They'll send it through the window. You don't want people carrying it up the steps. It'll eat up a whole day's worth of time. And you'll have a bunch of angry employees. So get it boomed in the truck if you can. Sometimes there's wires and things in the way, or bus routes in the city, so not always possible. But that'd be a tip that I would give you. Great.
And then what other finishings, other than drywall, would be appliances, flooring and everything, right?
Yeah. What are you doing with your flooring? It's always a huge expense. Doors, are they going to be hollow core? Are they going to be solid core? What type of trim are you doing? Are you just going to use cheap stuff from Home Depot? Or are you going to you're going to bring the house back to life for what it looked like originally? Obviously cabinets is a big one. All types of things to consider. Is it a flip? Is it a rental? If it's a rental, you want to make it as bulletproof as we say, to stand up the tenants. Yeah. And so what does that mean? Are you going to put hardwood floors in so that they can be resanded over time? Or are you going to do some vinyl product that usually stands up pretty well too?
Cool. So let's talk timing again. After you do the installation, you said that it would take just a day or two. How long should people allot out for all the finishings you just mentioned? Hardwood floors, drywall, windows, whatnot.
Yeah, drywall is going to go next. Typically, we're going to budget 10 days in there. A lot's dependent on weather, so you might want to give them a little bit longer, 2 weeks. And then the rest of the finishing, it really depends how detailed it is. How detailed is the tile work? How big is the kitchen? Things like that. But typically it's going to take you 2 months to get through the rest of that, depending on the size of your crew and things, obviously.
Gotcha. And then after that, is there a final inspection, or does the city have to come back out again?
Yeah, so same thing as before. You're going to call for your electrical inspection. So third-party electrical is going to come out, and he or she will sign off. There'll be a sticker on the inside of your panel, electrical panel, wherever that's located, and then you call the city back for their final inspection. The only thing I guess we left out is if you need sprinklers or an alarm system or fire alarm system, that would be a whole nother inspection as well. But typically single family renovations like that are not going to require that.
Great. And there's one last thing I thought of is the exterior. You mentioned how important that is to make sure you're doing the best you can on the exterior, because usually that's when the money runs tight. So, do you loop that in with the finishing and cosmetics process, or do you recommend that people work that into another one of the steps we mentioned?
Yeah, so a lot of it's dependent on weather, right? Especially if we get down to this time of year. Are you going to paint the exterior when it's 30 degrees out? The answer is no. So do we have a day where it's 50, 60 degrees randomly? You might need to pivot a little bit and get the outside done if you have a couple of those days. If you're flipping a house or even renting it, the sooner you can get the outside done and looking nice, people on the outside are going to start to ask questions, and maybe you can find your buyer or your renter right there. So the sooner you can get the exterior done, the better, in my opinion.
Great. Something you can kind of like work into the process, like you said, when you have these off chances of a day that's sunny or you're not having any other work done, so you might as well focus on that sort of throughout the whole process, right?
Yeah, and there's times like when the drywall, if you're not doing the drywall yourself, you have a drywall crew in there, that could be a good time for you to be on the exterior because they're consuming the entire inside of the building. If it's a full gut renovation, so maybe that's a time where you and your crew go to the exterior.
Cool. One extra topic I want to talk to you here about, and that's finding a contractor and ways to hire a contractor. I'm sure somebody or everybody in this call has some idea of what that process looks like and might have gone through it or gone through it and failed. But as a contractor or a construction design expert yourself, maybe you can give us your tips for building not only a good relationship, but a productive relationship with your contractor.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of, which way are you going to go? Are you going to do some of this yourself, hire somebody to do something? Are you going to hire a bigger company, or are you going to hire, the guy in the truck? And I think they all have pluses and minuses, right? The guy in a truck is going to be much, much cheaper than say a company like mine. But there's a downside there. If he gets injured or one of his family members gets sick, something happens, he's got nobody to fill in for him. So your job's going to get put on hold. If something happens with my company now, if somebody got COVID, something like that, we're going to pivot, move some guys over so that your job can progress as scheduled. As far as hiring a contractor, again, I just say, just be open and honest. What are you looking for? What is your timeline? What is your budget? And then, the biggest thing I think is not necessarily the money, but are you comfortable with the contractor? Because you have to have a partnership that's going to last a month to, 6 months, depending on the size of the project. And I think some questions you can answer right off the bat is, do you have workers' comp? That's easily the biggest one. It's expensive. It's a pain, but that will tell you right there who's serious and who's not. And ask them for their insurance policy so that they can show you if they have workers' comp. Another one is how do we communicate? Is it all like through text message? It's going to be all over the place. Is it through email, phone calls? Is there a back end person? Right. So when you do a whole house renovation, if it's through email and text message, there's going to be like 500-600 communications. That's a mess. That's going to get lost. Right. So in my company, we have a back end program where everything gets kept. All of your selections, a schedule, finances, everything is kept back there. It's all organized. The client, they have access to it. Those are types of things they bring value, I think, to the client. They help keep the project organized and on track. But there's a cost to that, and I recognize that. So we're not the best fit for everybody. So there's different ways to go. And I would also encourage. I remember my first rental that I bought, probably 15 years ago, and I renovated the whole thing myself. I think there's something to that on your first one or two. Right? Just get in there, figure it out. There's plenty of knowledge out there with YouTube and friends. You might even be able to hire a contractor as like a consultant to swing by once a week and take a look at what you're doing. But there's a lot to learn and there's a lot of money involved. So you don't want to mess things up too badly.
And that concludes my conversation with Dan Greenspun, president of Penn Construction and Design, about the construction timeline and how planning and budgeting factor into the process. Next week, we'll be speaking with Will Fernandez, Director of Audits and Investigations at L&I, about how to make sure you are compliant with city code on your development projects. The interviews on this program were recorded during Jumpstart Germantown's weekly Jumpinar series, which takes place via Zoom webinar every Monday night at 7 p.m. If you'd like to participate in the live Q&A with our guest, be sure to head to jumpstartgermantown.com/events and register for next week's Jumpinar. And if you're interested in starting a Jumpstart program in your own community, visit gojumpstart.org to see our how-to guide and open source training workbook. Thanks so much for listening to the Jumpstart Philly Real Estate Radio Show on Germantown Community Radio, WRGU 92.9 FM, and be sure to tune in next week.